Yes, look who I've got. We are live with the president of the American Federation of Teachers, Randi Weingarten, whose new book I'm holding. And what a provocative title, Randy. Why Fascists Fear Teachers, Public Education and the Future of Democracy. It's just out. Thank you for joining me. It's great to see you, my friend. I've been following you for a long time. Interviewed you, interviewed you
Yep.
several times. This is quite a moment we're in.
Yep. It is quite a moment we're in. I'm wearing a t-shirt today that says I'm with the banned books because, these culture wars have really created an environment that is pretty terrible for, I would say, parents and teachers and kids. And, what teachers are trying to do is they're really trying to break through all of this to actually create an environment where kids feel protected and honored and where they can learn.
Public education teachers in particular have been under attack for a really long time. I've been in that fight with you. My mom up being a public school teacher, of course, having kids in the public schools.
Yeah.
And
And
you've
living
seen,
in the place where I grew up, that
I live,
seems unrecognizable to me.
am raising my daughters, or raised, they're 17 and 21's in college now, in the same district that Randy grew up in. And we've been
Yeah.
in communication about how much it's changed. And you've been shocked to see that change in such a short period of time since growing up here yourself. But that's where, so when, just getting to the book, I think it helps to define
Yep.
fascism as well as we can. And
Yep.
man, I had no idea about some of the history that you talk about in the book, specifically with Norway's teachers and fascism. American fascism isn't the same as German fascism or as even Italian fascism at the same time. I think it's important to, have some discernment there, obviously, but make no mistake, that is a pretty good definition of where we're at, according to fascism experts. How do you define what we are seeing in America in 2025 as fascism?
Well, let me, part of what I wanted to do, and look, Rachel Maddow did this as well. I thought she did this brilliantly in her books, talking about the story of American fascism in the 30s, in the 30s and 40s in particular, Prequel and her other books. But what I tried to do in terms of the definition of fascism is I watched at the end of the November 2024 elections how when two generals created a warning sign about their experiences with then President Trump and Trump won and used the term fascism,
Yeah.
there was a blowback on the generals. And part of that blowback was that people don't understand the term. And so, what I wanted to do is, as a school teacher, is describe fascistic behavior. And I'm trying to use the exercise of critical thinking. So basically, people then apply the term as opposed to whether or not I'm going to label somebody this way. Because if I labeled somebody this way, the whole conversation is going to be, is she right? Is she wrong? As opposed to understanding the behaviors. So let me talk about the behaviors. That's why let me dwell on this and answer your question this way, Pete.
Yeah,
The
please. Yeah.
behaviors of fascistic behavior starts with what we see very much politically, even in our country, and us versus them. But it gets much, much, much worse because it creates a rage. The strong man creates a rage and an anger and a cultural anger. And it doesn't just say that the us is better. It demonizes the them to such a
Right.
point, dehumanizes, demonizes, makes the them into a speck that justifies the violence against the them. So the example I often use is not the concentration camps in terms of Germany, in terms of Nazism. The example I often use, not in the book, but I've been using, is think about Austria after the German takeover, after the Nazi takeover, and what they did to the Jews. They had Jews on their hands and knees washing streets in their best clothes, on their hands and knees, washing streets. Think about how dehumanizing that picture is of people. And that's the and so fascists create that level of dehumanization of the them, with a sense that the only entity that is going to be the savior is the fascistic government. It is a
Right.
style of government. It is, and that's what they do. And so why teachers, why fascists are afraid of teachers, and I start with the Norwegian story about the paper clips, is
Yeah.
because what teachers do is two things. They bring community together, they create a safe and welcoming environment in their classrooms and hopefully on their campuses. And the second thing they do is they teach critical thinking and problem solving and the habits of democracy, so that hopefully kids can discern fact from fiction, information from misinformation. We want kids to figure out how to think, or to help kids get to how to think, not what to think. But all of this is what teachers try to do in their classrooms. That's why my first chapter is about critical thinking, something the founders really wanted for kids to be able to do. And my
Yeah, I
second
think
chapter is about safe and welcoming environments.
yeah, and the whole book is so good. I love this book. I love pretty much everything you do and say. There's no doubt that I've been a big fan and supporter of yours for years now, of course. But the issue on critical thinking, we hear those words and we have different ideas come to mind. What does it mean? Am I a critical thinker, Randy? Do you think? You think?
Well, let me put aside the fact that I love you dearly and not have
Just say
that
no. It'd be funnier if it
bias,
just
and
not
that
you, Pete.
and not and not have that bias my views. But in all the different conversations that we've had, Pete, look, the questions you ask, you've read the book, you asked a question about, fascistic behavior. I talked to you just now about what it is, how you apply it. And then what you did was you, um, based
Made it
upon that
about me.
answer, you asked me, no, no, you asked me another question.
Yeah.
That's critical thinking. That's the kind of taking information and being able to apply it and build on it. That's critical thinking.
How is
So I
critical
think the
thinking
answer is yes.
how is critical thinking taught in schools? I went to the final meet the teacher night because my younger daughter is a senior. And by the way, parents are really checking out by that final meet the teacher night. But my daughter's in a lot of hard classes, and I like to meet the teachers and who are with my daughter, and mostly I'd like to
Is she
support them. And
taking AP Gov?
yes, yes,
Is
she
she
is.
taking the class I love to teach?
She's taking it, but the teacher's teaching it for the first year, and he kept saying, this stuff can get pretty dry. And I was like, this should not be hard to make exciting, in my opinion, especially now. But he's trying to thread a needle in front of parents. He's like, it's interesting times.
Yeah,
But the reason I bring this up in terms of critical thinking is one of the things that the teacher said was we have the students take different sides of an issue, including a side they certainly wouldn't support, and then learn to defend
correct.
it. And I thought, well, that's a great kind of way to describe critical thinking. In her sociology class, they're reading all these different essays around all kinds of different theories. That's critical thinking. But it's so often we are told that teachers are indoctrinating students. I think the opposite is true. They're teaching them to not be indoctrinated and to critically think. And that's what fascists suppose. How am I doing on my definition of critical thinking?
I think you're doing well. I mean, I think the what the extreme right is very good at is essentially labeling something the opposite of what we actually do. When you
Yes, they
so
are.
so when you actually do the so but notice what the teacher said, because of being concerned about, things being weaponized. So we have to have many more conversations with parents these days about what we're doing and why, to ensure that we can actually do our job. But I used to love, I used to loved doing a debate around the bombing of Hiroshima because and Nagasaki.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's a good one.
clearly there is a moral high ground here, which should be obvious. I mean, in retrospect, I would say most of us believe that we should never have bombed or create an atomic bomb on people, period, full stop. And that's why you've had this, in the last X number of years, all of these guardrails and treaties against nuclear arsenals. But to take the position that is opposite what you really believe is a way of learning, developing the muscle of seeing, a different side and of being to argue a different side and doing it in debate is really important. Now, the question you asked is, are we doing enough of it? Look, if we don't have more than 5 minutes to do a debate on this, that's not doing enough of it.
Right.
What the way in which, and I've been very critical of the fact that the accountability systems have moved schools to focus on test prep and far too much because people are very concerned about the scores, and you see why, because the scores get weaponized against people. But the way to really teach is to take the time to let kids prepare with each other and to do project based instruction. And a debate is a perfectly fantastic way of doing project based instruction, but you don't spend 5 minutes in a class preparing for that debate. If you really want to do it well, you spend a few days preparing for
Right.
that
Right.
debate. You do that in a group, and but when you do that, then you haven't finished the curriculum, and then what have you done in terms of preparing kids for the region? So the way in which accountability gets done and testing gets done in public schools across America has actually diminished, particularly, before you get to the AP courses, has diminished our ability to really teach critical thinking. And where I have seen it done well, actually, is in career tech ed courses where
Right.
we are teaching a trade or teaching a workforce skill, because that is actually developed around project-based instruction and performance assessments. And we should be doing more and more of that in academic classwork, as opposed to trying to race through every aspect of a curriculum to get ready for, a Regents test or a fourth grade or an eighth grade test.
Yeah, yeah. Discussion, debate, writing, reading, but practicing science is something that's also, I think, helps develop critical thinking, right? Because I didn't like science very much. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it. I hated math for sure. But doing science labs and learning about
Yes.
biology and chemistry and physics just a little bit, just enough to know that this is A, something I don't want to study, and B, something I want to trust experts on. But just learning the scientific method helps teach critical thinking. That's another part of, like, a lot of what you're doing in school. I believe there should be more doing, because that's how I learned, by doing. But in science labs are a great example of, I think, critical thinking too. I don't know
Right.
if you.
I mean, think about things that are um not new. Socratic method
Sure.
is a really important way of teaching social studies. And, we do it in law schools, but, sometimes it's used to, basically embarrass people. But Socratic method, Socrates, really important in terms of asking questions, seeing all sides of an issue, and scientific method is really important. But we have to get kids reading again. And part of what is happening this school year is the um is the no distraction cell phone,
Right.
basically cell phone bans are
Yep.
really important, because what's happening, and I love this, one of my teacher colleagues said, who's teaching right now, said, kids, and she whispered this to me, she said, kids are writing notes to each other in classrooms again. I said, how quaint, how great. She said,
That's awesome.
kids. And
That's
another
awesome.
teacher said to me, kids are talking to each other in the hall again, as opposed to just, focused on their screen like this. And
Kids are
and
learning to
so
write in the tiniest handwriting on the tiniest piece of paper to cheat on the test. Are they
and a
doing that yet? That
piece
was my thing.
Well, look, it's part of why I think we're going to actually go back to blue books. Like I've said, because I feel like I'm
Mm.
so old. I'm like, remember the blue books? And I get this blank expression,
Right,
So
right.
I think, okay, we're going to have to go back to penmanship and we're going to have to go back to doing an essay or a test in class on a blue book instead of having
I
Chat
had a test,
GPT
one of my
be
final
there and cut and paste.
I love that. My 10th grade final exam, it was a question. I had to write an essay about the work of Martin Luther, not Dr. King. And I didn't know who it was. So I decided to write an impassioned essay about Dr. Martin Luther King. Knew I was writing the wrong one. And the teacher said, you were talking about the wrong person, but it was so good that I'll give you credit.
Yeah,
That's how wrong I was. But
but
I
that's
really cared about what I learned about MLK. In your the last thing I want to say about the critical thinking thing in this chapter, in this first chapter, you talk about teaching democracy, which I think is so important. But you write, if you don't mind, critical thinking is the heart of democracy, the muscle at the core that keeps democracy healthy and strong. We don't tell our students who to vote for. We don't tell our students what to believe. We teach them how to think for themselves, why democracy is important, and how they're an important part of making it work and making it better. But rather than help teachers build a stronger America based on knowledge and truth and freedom of thought, fascists use fear, bullying, and culture wars to try to shut down teaching and democracy. I saw it last night, the school board meeting. I see it every day in the news. Why is teaching democracy so important? I feel like most Americans, including kids in school today, don't even know what democracy is because they've had some semblance of it their whole life. So they certainly don't know what it looks like to not have it.
I think I mean, again, that's part of the reason why I felt the need to define, to have this provocative title and to define fascistic behavior without labeling any particular person as a fascist. I think people don't know. We use the term democracy so much, people don't know what it means. Americans love freedom. Americans want freedom of thought. Americans want freedom of religion. And Americans want themselves to be free. Tim Snyder talks about it as me speech versus free speech.
Right.
What has happened of late, and this has been, and you see it this week, is that the shutting other people down instead of listening, the shutting other people down, the bullying, the saying you're wrong without even hearing someone, the censoring, I believe in Americans and I believe in our kids. And I think if we actually could teach kids the habits of democracy and of freedom of thought and how to think and how to discern fact from fiction, our kids would do a whole lot better than we're doing right now. And so I would say to anybody who disagrees with me, look, you may have agreed with everything that somebody at that Orangetown school board meeting was saying yesterday. I'm saying this to anybody who thinks, but if you don't believe that the other side should have the same rights as you, that's a big problem. Everybody needs to have those same rights. And then how do you create a society? Because under the rule of law, we're governed by the people through our elected officials. That's what democracy is. We do it through a constitution that tells us what the rules of the game are. And if somebody says, I have the right to vote for someone, but you don't, I have the right to express myself, but you don't, that's where democracy fails. We
Right.
need to lift up everybody's rights in terms of the engagement and listen to everybody.
I think that's where democracy fails, and that's where fascism begins. Because if we're both playing by the same set of rules, that's more like democracy. But if you're cheating to win and erasing history, yesterday they made
Yeah.
Museums take down a picture of a slave who had been whipped. Every day, yesterday the Department of Justice took down the website that had their own work study saying that the vast majority of domestic terrorism was coming from the right. They're erasing
Right.
things.
Erasing history.
How is
And
that?
then they're yelling at someone who's pointing out that they're erasing history. So it's
Exactly.
not only that they're erasing history, then when you point out that they're erasing history, they yell at you.
And
So
tell you to
it is so
to tone down
so
your
this
rhetoric.
is so this is what this is why I wanted people to understand the behavior, the us versus them, and doing it more demagogically and more demagogically. So not only is the them not having their side of the debate or their factual side or their history out there, but then those who are fighting for the them are dehumanized, or the them themselves are dehumanized so much that it's only the us. And this is what is so ironic about this moment of time, if I may, not just about
Mm,
schooling, but about everything else, that Donald Trump is not even helping the us. Like the us voted for Donald Trump, not, just if you think about the people who voted for him, they voted for him mostly to make the economy better, and the economy is worse.
right.
Prices are up. And so the irony here is that the us that he supposedly is fighting for are actually in worse shape. But my book is really about how teachers are the antidote to all of this, because if fascists are trying to create rage so that the them are more and more and more dehumanized, and there's so much fear and there's so much anger that it's the beloved strongman who is the one who is, basically you're relying on, the us is relying on them. What teachers do is they actually basically say, no, 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 no. Everyone should be entitled to a safe and welcoming environment, not just those who are following the strongman, but everyone. And what teachers do is say, look, pluralism and all of us getting along, regardless of whether we're Republicans, Democrats, or independents, kids getting along, having a safe and welcoming environment, that's really important. And what teachers then do is also say, and we're teaching kids to prepare for their lives. They need these critical thinking and problem solving skills for work as well as for their life, as well as for civic engagement. It's not just for college, they need it in every aspect of their lives. So teachers are actually, when I say teachers are the antidotes, and I tell a lot of stories about teachers and how they have done this and what and who they are and what they do, that's the hope. And they're doing it regardless of what happened at the Orangetown school board meeting
Yeah. Well,
yesterday.
and
They're doing it regardless of the slime and the smears that get thrown at them.
I
That's why I
mean,
love them.
I'll come back to chapter 2, but because you just brought up the fear that they have to live with, I want to ask you about the protections that they have to have. You, of course, are the president of a huge teachers union, not only teachers, of course, healthcare providers and more. But I mean, I talk to these teachers all the time, off the record, especially. I try to tell them there's a group of parents in the community that will, are doing our best to protect them. But let's be honest, without the protections that they have from their union, they would be even more afraid of just losing their job and more likely to do whatever it takes to keep that job and to be able to do what they want to do, which is teach kids. Teachers are being threatened all the time, not only by any statement they might post on social media, which most, teachers are pretty careful about that, but of course, what they're teaching in the classroom. Suddenly, things that weren't very controversial are becoming controversial. I'm not talking about history and literature or anything related to sex. I'm talking about like social and emotional learning. I'm talking about like diversity. All of a sudden, these are bad things. If teachers didn't have the protection that they have of their unions, they would probably be a lot more intimidated. And I would argue that they are in the states where they don't have strong labor protections. What do you say about that? Because you do write about the importance of unions and
You're totally right.
organizing.
I mean, you're totally right. So, and part of the reason, I mean, let me take a step back and say this. If you think about power, if I may use that word, power in America, if you think about how anyone has any power to influence their own lives, to have a better life for themselves and their family, there's kind of three things that do it: education, something economic. Let me do the second one: politics. You know, you elect people that you hope are going to Congress to do the will, your will, not the will of billionaires or, you know, others. And the third is labor. And most people are not born with a silver spoon in their mouths. Most people don't have personal economic power, and they get their power, their economic power, from collective bargaining. And teachers happen to be more unionized these days in America than pretty much anyone else in
Yeah.
America. And so, you know, just like there's been a 60-year fight by corporate America to deunionize people, you know, by calling people all sorts of names, by fighting every single which way to stop people from unionizing, by restricting who can unionize. What they do is they smear unions and smear people who lead unions, like me, so that they can try to create a cultural disconnect between the members and the unions, or between the public and the unions. That's what the Janus case was, when they said, okay, you don't have to join your union, you can opt out of it. And guess what? In New York State, 98% of the people, despite everything that gets thrown at them, keep on staying in their unions because they know what you just said, which
Yeah.
is at the end of the day, somebody has to have your back. And for teachers, it's in New York State, it's NYSET. It's the local union. It's
Yeah.
the Clarkstown Teachers Association, which I remember
Well,
my teachers being part of. It's the Orangetown Teachers Association. It's the Nyack Teachers
and you
Association,
mentioned you mentioned NICET.
which my mother was part of.
Oh yeah.
You know,
You
yeah,
mentioned
I mean,
NICET. NICET is the union that represents New York State teachers, and I would
yeah,
always see that on envelopes that would come to the house when I was younger. I didn't know what it meant, but my mom was, of course, a member. I was talking to my mom the other day, and she was just talking about how so much of her health care is covered because she
yeah.
was a teacher. And I'm like, yeah, you better believe it, because she taught in a real hard school for over 20 years, and it's the least they can do is take care of her health care bills. And those are the protections. So I always like to mention that. And you also talk
And
about,
and what they do, this is what these protections mean. It just gives you the benefit of the doubt. And every worker should have the benefit of the doubt. You
yes,
should just be able to say, this is why I did what I did.
yeah,
I mean, none of us, I would say, none of us, every one of us who have gone into teaching, we do it because we want to make a difference in the lives of kids. Why else would you go into teaching? You feel a passion not only to the work you do, but it's to kids. It's to watch. And what is the what do teachers tell me more than anything else? When I see that connection with kids, when I see what has happened, oh my God, that makes my day. That's what teachers in their professional pursuit live for. I don't understand. And I'm not naive. I do not understand why this is not a cherished American principle, and why there's constantly the demonizing. I mean, one of the people who demonize education all the time, already this week he's threatened to sue me because I've used his words where he said the way you get to universal, vouchers is you create universal public school distrust. and sometimes you have to be ruthless and brutal. How dare anyone? That's what I'm lifting up. That's what I'm exposing. How dare anyone say that about public schooling, about teachers, about what happens in classrooms? Somebody does something wrong. Okay, deal with it. But universally, parents are under enough pressure. We need to create and make schools into the safe and welcoming places they should. And we need to give teachers some level of authority and discretion to be able to meet the needs of kids. How is that not a cherished public policy, American patriotism in this world, in
I
this country?
I mean, you know all the reasons why that is.
That's what I exposed. That's what I exposed in this book. That's why I wrote this book, because it's not, that's what teachers try to do.
Right.
Why is it smeared? Why is it reviled? Why is it not supported? It doesn't mean we shouldn't strengthen schools. Of course we should. Of
It,
course we have to. But what what happened in that school board meeting for you last night, it's like, think about, let me do this. Let me say it the opposite way. Think about, since Charlie Kirk's assassination, social media companies failed us because the video of that assassination was everywhere immediately, and every channel, on every child saw it the next day in classrooms across America, or that afternoon. Teachers are having to deal with it to try to assure kids that they're safe. Parents are having to deal with it. Why wasn't at the school board meeting this week lifting up what teachers did to denounce violence and to try to help kids be safe? That would have been an off ramp. That would have been the way we figure out in Orangetown or Clarkstown or anywhere else. How do you lift community and create an off ramp so we are all denouncing political violence? But instead, it is, let's figure out a way to weaponize it.
do you think, I just kind of thought of this, and I'm sure there's a lot of better ways of putting it and a lot of scholarship even on it, but isn't there, it feels like some people want to control what their kids learn in school and in life, and a lot of them homeschool as a result, maybe, and other people like you and me and most teachers and educators want to teach kids how to learn, less about what you learn and controlling what you learn. I want to teach you how to learn. I want to give you all kinds of different subject matter to choose from so you can find out what you might be interested in or have an aptitude for. And then back to the critical thinking. It's not about control. It's about giving a student or someone else as much control as they can have about their
Yeah.
own destiny, which providing them with a bunch of information, contrasting ideas is the way.
So I would say, and this may be where you and I may differ a little bit on this, which is, we have to make sure that parents are part of that equation in a real way. Meaning that's why having meetings with parents at the beginning of the year as a school teacher, explaining what you're trying to do, getting parental buy-in is so important, because, uh, you know, a parent is a kid's first teacher. And they're going to, particularly in the younger ages, they want and they have a right to the kind of control and discretion they want for their kids to have. I don't have a right to substitute my judgment for the judgment of a parent in terms of a young kid. I just don't, and I shouldn't. But the issue becomes, our job is to open up minds, and our job is to understand the environment, and our job is to prepare kids for whatever that environment is. So we have to work with parents to get to exactly where you where
I
you said.
certainly
And that's the rub is, there's not enough discussion in the way in which you and I are discussing it. Look, I just said I may disagree with you on some things. Look at how we're discussing it. We're not screaming at each other. We're saying and we have to, but that those kind of conversations, they don't happen much. Like take the Maryland district, where books were which created the Mahmoud case that happened last year in the Supreme Court. There is a rule that parents have an opt out in that district if they don't want certain books or a certain curriculum, and it wasn't used. And instead, what ended up happening is the case goes to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court says, yeah, parents have this right, that has this opt out. The opt out should have been used. And yes, as a gay person, I, I clearly want us to really acknowledge and understand gay families, but you have to be able to have that conversation with parents so that parents understand what you as a school teacher are doing, and that you become partners there. And when that happens, we end up being able to effectively teach.
One of the things that fascists do really well is propaganda and branding. And where we
Absolutely.
might differ on this parent input thing is only because I'm been in the fight and you are representing teachers and you know that you have to. And I know that you really believe bringing parents into the fold, but I'm cynical in such a way that I've always been in the fold. I've always been involved with my daughter's schools and teachers, and it really bothers the hell out of me when parents that never ever attended a parent teacher meeting or meet the teacher or did any volunteer work start coming and telling the teachers what they can and can't do and teach.
Yep.
They have used a phrase called parental rights that is extremely, extremely effective. And that's what I push back on, because of course
Hmm.
you have parental rights. What bothers the shit out of me is that you haven't been accessing them, and all of a sudden, given a fragment of information, you're screaming at teachers and telling them how to teach. You didn't do anything. You weren't taking any interest until, frankly, specifically Turning Point USA came into the Clarkstown School District and handed out buttons and told lies about what was happening in our school. And then they screamed parental rights. Nonsense. You were never in these schools until tonight. That's what bothers me.
And look, it bothers me. It bothers, I mean, you and I've had enough conversations that it bothers me too. My job is that I have to get through the clack, and I have to get through the noise.
Yep. Yep.
And that's why you do all the things. And I mean, look, it's part of the reason that it's absolutely essential that we have parent participation in an organized manner in schools all the time. Because when you have that, when you have PTAs that are functioning, when you have parent teacher community that's functioning, then what ends up happening is that that community actually starts saying to people who are fearful, or who have been organized to try to disrupt, or all of this other stuff, that community starts saying to that people, hey, why don't you come, why don't you be with us, why
Yeah.
don't you act with us? And then all of a sudden, you know it starts isolating what the real motives are. There's a story, Pete, from that the old 60 Minutes did about a South Carolina community where there were lots of books that were banned, and there was getting into a huge debate and fight. And there was a group of parents who became a committee with teachers, and they worked together on what should be available in the library, the school library, and what shouldn't. So they went from, I don't remember the number, 60 to 100 books that were banned, to maybe 3 to 5 books that were
Mm,
banned.
sure.
And what happened was the community itself learned so much about teaching and learning because they engaged in this process, and it was so affirming. It completely changed the way in which the community looked at schools, looked at each other, the conversations. And 60 Minutes, and 60 Minutes had the Moms for Liberty group of people that were trying to
Yeah.
do the
Yeah. I saw
banning,
that. Yeah.
who were you remember this? They then started looking at their notes, and they didn't know what to say. I mean, it exposed the politics for what it was, which was disruption and undermining of schooling. And it empowered basically a conservative group of community activists and parents to basically say, no, this is what our schools should be. And that's the kind of advocacy that I'm pushing for.
The Moms for Liberty has a chapter in Clarkstown, and it one of the big issues, they're very anti-trans, kids transitioning from one gender to another. The irony is the Moms of Liberty chapter is founded by a man. Like, there wasn't a woman who wanted to found the Moms. It had to be a guy who's against trans people, but he's pretending online to be a woman to create Moms of Liberty. Anyway, I I will let you go. I want everybody to go get the book, but my last question is about the way forward. And you mentioned it, I think, in the opening of the book when you talk about what the Norwegian teachers and students did. I feel like we're here. I feel like the worst of it has
Yeah.
arrived. Paperclip
Yeah.
story is amazing. I had never heard it, I don't think. They all started wearing paperclips to signal to each other, and some even made necklaces out of the paperclips. It's a fascinating and tragic story. But it's different then than it is here, obviously. But we are here. We've arrived. I think we're living in what people are using different words, but I think fascist is very applicable. It's getting worse. I am finding that my role here, my purpose is that we're not going to change this overnight. We're not going back
No.
to what we believe. So if we're here now, to me, one of the best things we can do is build communities. And I'm finding all kinds of ways to build community. You talk about that in the book. That has to be
Exactly
part
right.
of the way forward for public schools and public educators and the public in general. Go ahead.
Look, King said this in his last book as well: chaos versus community.
Mm,
That was his question to
mm,
all of us basically at the end of his life. The most important thing we can do is build community, is have people build a big tent, have people who have first similar values and then similar aspirations and similar needs or wants or interests, and keep on building bigger and bigger tents, because we, the people, nobody's going to save us but ourselves. We, the people, really believe in an America that is about aspiration for all. I really believe that. I could not be a school teacher or a unionist for as long as I've been if I didn't believe that. And teachers every day try to get the best out of people and the best out of our kids and try to help them thrive and have this habits and develop the muscles and the skills they need. Education and community are the answer. We have to speak up, we have to stand up, we have to show up, and we have to start with the value of not fear and hate,
mm.
but love and hope. That's who teachers are, and that is why fascists fear them so much.
So well said. So well written. What a great book. You're an American treasure. I am so glad to count you as a friend and a mentor. Always so inspired by your work and your fearlessness and your courage with which you do it. And I really appreciate you joining me here today. Thank you so much, Randy. Congratulations. I
Thank you,
hope everybody
Pete.
goes and gets this book. It's integral to the way forward.
Thank you. And go to your favorite bookstore to get it, or, order it from the way in which you order books. But Pete, thank you so much. And thank you for continuing to fight in Rockland County for what's
Mm,
right. Thank you.
thank you. All right. Bye, everybody. Thanks for watching live.